In the high-octane world of Formula One, where speed and precision reign supreme, few names echo with the same blend of steely determination and unwavering intelligence as Niki Lauda. A three-time world champion, his career was a testament to relentless dedication and an almost scientific approach to racing. But his legacy is forever intertwined with one of the most dramatic and inspiring comebacks in sporting history. Born into a wealthy Viennese family, Andreas Nicolas Lauda was expected to follow a conventional path, probably into the world of banking. However, young Niki's heart sought a different path. The thrill of speed, the roar of an engine. His passion for motorsport was ignited early, taking him down a path far from his family's expectations. Against his family's wishes and without their financial support, Lauda embarked on his racing dream. He started in Mini Coopers, gradually working his way up the ranks through Formula V and Formula 3. His first car was a Mini Cooper, which he was forced to buy after crashing it. The car belonged to the father of one of his friends and was for sale. The two went out on a joyride, which ended predictably badly. Lauda was forced to beg for a loan from his grandmother and then rebuilt the car himself, turning it into his first racer. Success racing in the Mini drove a desire for more, and Lauda leveraged his future assets, life insurance and inheritances, to secure loans from Austrian banks. This early financial struggle forged in him a relentless drive and a pragmatic approach to racing. Every move had to be calculated, every risk assessed, and he continued his climb through junior racing. In 1971, Lauda secured loans to fund a drive with March in Formula 2 and made his Formula 1 debut at his home race in Austria. In 1972, he drove a full but largely unsuccessful season for March in Formula 1. However, his talent and tenacity had caught the eye of Clay Regazzoni, who helped him secure a drive with the struggling BRM team for 1973. BRM team were facing financial difficulties and lacking consistent performance. But for Lauda, it was a foot in the door, a crucial step on his journey to the pinnacle of motorsport. He showed flashes of promise, enough to convince Enzo Ferrari to take a gamble on the Austrian in 1974. Ferrari saw something in Lauda which promised the end to a championship drought which stretched back to John Surtees' title in 1964. Lauda and Ferrari created a partnership that would define an era. The combination was quick right from the start, with Lauda taking his first victory in Spain and winning again in Holland. Alongside his two victories, Lauda claimed 9 pole positions, but the car was incredibly unreliable, and he retired from more than half of the season's races with mechanical problems. After the British Grand Prix, Lauda led the championship. However, he failed to reach the finish line again in the rest of the season. Nevertheless, he managed to score a promising 4th place in the championship. Over the course of the winter, he worked through testing to help the team resolve its issues. His meticulous feedback and relentless pursuit of perfection transformed the car, and as a result in 1975, he delivered Ferrari their first Drivers' Championship in over a decade with a dominant performance, winning 5 of the 14 races and claiming pole position 9 times. Lauda wasn't just fast, he was calculating. He approached every race with a strategic mind, understanding the limits of his car and his competitors. He was a driver who thought his way to victory. In 2 seasons at Ferrari, he had established himself as the best driver in a field of talented individuals. The start of the 1976 season saw Lauda in commanding form, winning 4 of the first 6 races and finishing second in the other 2, racing into a 33-point lead in the championship. Nearest rival, James Hunt, had claimed victory for McLaren in Spain, as well as scoring pole position for the opening 2 races of the season. The McLaren was fast, but Lauda and the Ferrari were in a different league and seemed destined to clinch the championship even earlier than the previous season. By the time of the German Grand Prix, with 7 races to run, Lauda had stretched his lead further, but the race at the infamous Nurburgring would become a turning point, not just for Lauda and the title, but for the safety of Formula One itself. Lauda had been agitating with drivers in the FIA to stop the race from going ahead. The length of the track meant marshals were sparsely distributed around the lap, and if a driver crashed far away from a marshal's post, he was reliant on his own devices to escape the wreck. Not a comforting thought, given the number of drivers who were dying in fiery wrecks in Formula One at the time. An added complication was the large area covered by the circuit, which meant that weather systems could cross the track, bringing rain to parts of the circuit, whilst others remained dry. Coming over a blind crest to find the next corner drenched with rain was a very real and terrifying prospect. Lauda was unsuccessful in his attempts to have the race abandoned, so the start went ahead, with Hunt and Lauda on the front row of a grid dampened by early morning rain. At the end of the first lap, with the track drying, most drivers stopped to switch their wet tyres for slicks. Lauda had made a poor start and slid down the field. Coming out of the pits, he had a lot of catching up to do. On his first lap out of the pits, a catastrophic accident unfolded. Lauda's Ferrari veered off the track at the Bergwerk section, probably as a result of suspension failure. He hit an embankment on the right-hand side of the circuit before sliding across the track in flames. In the process, the car was hit by several others, spinning it further down the track. Lauda was briefly unconscious and trapped in the inferno. He was rescued by fellow drivers Harold Ertl, Guy Edwards and Brett Lunger, but mostly by Arturo Mezzario, who dived into the flames without consideration for his own safety, managing to release Lauda's seatbelts and lift him from the car. It was several minutes before medical assistance arrived, and Lauda was left at the side of the track, now conscious and in incredible pain. He was eventually airlifted to hospital, where it was discovered that he had suffered horrific burns, particularly to his head and face, and had inhaled toxic fumes which had done serious damage to his lungs. He lapsed into a coma, and for a time his life hung precariously in the balance. With death considered imminent, he was given the last rites. The motor racing world prepared for the worst, but against all odds, and despite the severity of his burns, Lauda survived. The road to recovery was long and agonising, yet within weeks, fuelled by an indomitable spirit and a burning desire to race again, Lauda began his rehabilitation. However, the idea that Lauda would return to racing seemed unthinkable, never mind that he could return before the end of the season. Ferrari hired Carlos Reutemann away from the Brabham team as his replacement, and it seemed like Hunt was now in a position to stroll to the title. Ferrari and the Formula One world severely underestimated Lauda's need to make his return though. The physical pain was unimaginable and the psychological scars ran deep, but Lauda possessed a mental fortitude that few could comprehend. He was determined not to let the accident define him. In just 1 month, with scars still fresh and wounds still weeping blood, Lauda flew his own plane to Italy to take part in a test session at Fiorano to prove to Ferrari that he was capable of making a return. Enzo Ferrari did not want Lauda to return. He felt that losing the championship because of the accident was a better outcome than having Lauda return and losing the championship anyway. Despite the lack of faith from his team, and having suffered massive weight and muscle loss during his recuperation, Lauda drove a full race distance at Ferrari's test track at close to lap record times, proving to everybody that he was indeed ready to return. So, just 40 days after his near-fatal crash, Niki Lauda was back in the cockpit of his Ferrari at the Italian Grand Prix for qualifying. Ferrari showed a complete lack of faith in his team leader by entering 3 cars for Reutemann, Regazzoni and Lauda, still unconvinced by Lauda's ability to be competitive. Outside of the team, the racing world was stunned by his courage and determination to return. Even more so after qualifying, where Lauda finished 5th, faster than James Hunt and far away the fastest of the 3 Ferraris. Come race day, driving through the pain, Lauda raced with his characteristic focus and determination, despite losing places off the line after being caught out by a new starting procedure introduced for this race. Working his way back past the cars around him, he finished a remarkable 4th, a testament to his unwavering spirit. But it was petroleum spirit which was a bigger point of discussion at McLaren, after the Italian authorities disqualified both Hunt and Mass from Saturday's qualifying session when their fuel was found to be illegal. As Friday's qualifying session had been run in torrential rain, it meant neither car qualified for the race, although both would start, after other teams were forced to withdraw for different reasons. Hunt lasted only until lap 11, when he spun off, meaning that Lauda increased his championship lead, which Hunt had reduced by 21 points whilst Lauda had been incapacitated. Ferrari made some inexplicable decisions around this time. Firstly, they chose to boycott the race in Austria, which was the one which immediately followed Germany. In doing so, they gave Hunt an unchallenged run, from which he grabbed 4th place. If the team had run Regazzoni, he could have beaten Hunt and reduced the latter's point tally by 1. Then, in Italy, Ferrari chose not to ask Regazzoni to slow from 2nd place, to allow Lauda to claim 3rd place and gain an additional point. As it turned out, either of these events would have allowed Lauda to win the championship on a countback. Finally, the recruitment of Reutemann, who Lauda despised, was a sign of no confidence in Lauda's return. With Hunt winning the next 2 races in Canada and the US, whilst Lauda could manage only a single 3rd place, the championship battle came down to the final race in Japan. Lauda led by 3 points, whilst Hunt could guarantee himself the title if he claimed victory at the spectacular Mount Fuji circuit. After qualifying, Hunt and Lauda were 2nd and 3rd, with Mario Andretti's Lotus on pole position. If the race finished in that order, then Lauda would be champion again. Race day dawned to torrential downpour, and for a while it seemed likely that the race would be cancelled, or at least postponed. However, after some delay, the organisers decided to proceed. Lauda was one of several drivers unhappy with the decision, and after just 1 lap he pulled into the pits to retire, not prepared to take the risk of continuing, having already come close to losing his life once that year. In a chaotic race, Hunt proceeded to secure the 3rd place he needed to claim the title. Ferrari's team manager Daniel Ordetto offered to tell the media that there was a problem with the car, but Lauda refused, and instead told them that he had retired because he believed his life was more important than the title. Whilst he lost the title, Lauda gained something perhaps even more profound: the unwavering respect and admiration of the world. His decision was not seen as weakness, but as a courageous act of self-preservation. Lauda was not bitter about losing the title. He was friends with Hunt away from the track, and though the battle between Ferrari and McLaren had been bitter and political, the 2 men had retained their mutual respect. In 1977, the Ferrari team garage was split, with Lauda and Reutemann barely on speaking terms, and Lauda livid with the lack of respect Ferrari had shown him in the aftermath of his accident. The Ferrari was not the fastest car, with Lotus having introduced its wing car, which had a huge performance advantage but suffered from poor reliability. Lauda approached the season pragmatically, realising that he was going to struggle to beat Andretti on pure speed, so he raced to maximise his results, taking 3 wins, including at Hockenheim in Germany, 1 year on from his near-fatal accident at the Nurburgring. The title was won with consistency, as Lauda ranked up 7 other podium places to seal the championship with 2 races to go. Having already told Ferrari that he was leaving the team to drive for Brabham Alfa Romeo in 1978, Lauda decided to skip the last 2 races of the season after learning that Ferrari planned to run a 3rd car for his replacement, Canadian Gilles Villeneuve. 14 months after being given the last rites, and still bearing the marks of the fire which had so nearly claimed his life, Lauda had reclaimed his title and joined a select band of drivers who had won multiple world titles. 1978 was to prove a less successful season for Lauda. Lotus had introduced the Lotus 79 ground effect car, and everyone was suddenly seeking to tame the airflow under their cars for additional downforce. For Brabham, that was a problem, as the Alfa Romeo engine was a flat 12 unit, which effectively prevented the team from developing a ground effect version of their car. Partway through the season, Gordon Murray presented his solution, the infamous fan car, which used a huge rear-mounted fan to suck air from under the car and create downforce from the ensuing vacuum, somewhat like a hovercraft in reverse. Lauda drove the car to victory in Sweden before, for political reasons, it was packed away in the bowels of Brabham's workshops, never to be seen again. Lauda also won in Italy after Andretti and Villeneuve were penalised for jump starts in a race marred by the accident which was to claim the life of Ronnie Peterson. In 1979, Lauda struggled to get to the finish line, with mechanical problems and accidents limiting him to just 2 points finishes in the first 13 races of the season. Worse was to come at the 14th round in Canada, where Brabham introduced its new Ford Cosworth-powered car. Lauda hated it. After spending almost his whole career sitting in front of charismatic 12-cylinder engines, the Cosworth was unimpressive, and Lauda found his motivation lacking. Midway through practice, he drove back to the pits and walked away from the team, saying he was bored of driving around in circles. Lauda had recently started his own airline and disappeared from the Formula One world to run the company and occasionally fly the jets himself. However, in 1981, Lauda realised that he hadn't lost his love for Formula One at all and started negotiating with several teams for a potential return in the 1982 season. At the time, Formula One teams were looking backwards for stars to boost the sport's popularity, and as well as Lauda, James Hunt and Jackie Stewart were being courted for Formula One returns. Lauda undertook a secret test with McLaren at Donington Park, where he discovered he had lost none of his speed, but was incredibly unfit. To address the latter, he turned to his close friend and fitness advisor, Willie Dungle. His decision to join McLaren rather than Brabham or Williams, two of the other teams he courted, was in part driven by the knowledge that McLaren had signed a deal with Porsche and TAG to develop a turbo engine to debut in the 1983 season. Lauda would rejoin the Formula One circus for 1982. His salary would be paid by Marlboro and was to be £2 million per season. His return to the sport was nothing if not eventful. In the first race of the season, Lauda was a key player in the driver's strike, which threatened to halt the South African Grand Prix. Whilst in only his third race back, he claimed victory at Long Beach, proving that he had lost none of his talent. He had qualified on the front row of the grid, alongside Andrea De Cesaris, who had become the youngest driver to win pole position. Concerned about De Cesaris' lack of experience, Lauda demonstrated just how much planning went into his race. He visited the young Roman and made it clear that he did not want to be involved in a first corner collision. If De Cesaris reached the first corner in the lead, Lauda would not dispute it. But if Lauda got there first, he expected the same courtesy. As it was, whilst De Cesaris rocketed off the line, Lauda bogged down and even lost second place to René Arnoux' Renault. As De Cesaris pulled away, Lauda was held up behind the little Frenchman in the turbocharged Renault. But when De Cesaris' teammate Bruno Giacomelli attempted an overly optimistic pass, Lauda saw him coming and moved out of the way. The Alfa Romeo ploughed into the back of the Renault, eliminating both the Italian and French cars from the race. Lauda was up to second place and 6 seconds adrift of De Cesaris. However, in a further demonstration of the thinking Lauda put into the whole race weekend, he had saved a new set of Michelin tyres for the race, whilst every other driver had made at least one qualifying run on theirs. The new tyre advantage meant he quickly caught De Cesaris, although the tight circuit meant he was unable to overtake, at least until Raoul Boissel blocked de Cesares when being lapped, handing Lauda an easy pass in the process. From there, the run to victory was straightforward, but it was a victory which had been built on 3 examples of the intelligence Lauda brought to his racing. He won again at Brands Hatch and claimed 5th place in the World Championship. In 1983, the TAG Porsche engine was late in arriving, with Lauda first getting his hands on it at the 13th race in Holland. The new turbo car was fast but fragile, failing to finish any of its races. However, it was clear that the new car and engine combination was capable of competing with the established turbo teams at the front of the grid, and prospects looked good for the upcoming season. 1984 was to bring new rules, which limited the amount of fuel a car could use during the race. As a result, turbo engines could not be run at full boost, and this transformed the reliability of the McLaren. In addition to an exemplary chassis, a result of designer John Barnard's early adoption of carbon fibre, the car now had performance and improved reliability. Lauda was not championship favourite though. That honour fell to his new teammate, Alain Prost, who had narrowly missed out on the previous year's title. Having been sacked by Renault as scapegoat for the title loss, McLaren were able to sign him up on the cheap, and the youthful and highly talented Prost was expected to outpace the old fox. The season started erratically for Lauda. He retired from 6 of the first 9 races, 4 times with mechanical trouble, as well as crashing twice, once at Monaco and once in Dallas. By the 10th race of the season at Brands Hatch, Lauda had fallen behind his teammate in the championship and looked to have lost his shot at the title. Brands was to be the start of a turnaround. Lauda won comfortably, whilst Prost retired, the start of a sequence which would see Lauda racking up the points and Prost retiring. The turnaround meant that when the cars arrived at the final race in Portugal, Lauda now led Prost by 3.5 points. Even if Prost were to win the race, Lauda only needed to finish second to clinch the title. After qualifying though, it seemed as if the pendulum had swung back in Prost's favour, the Frenchman claiming second place on the grid, whilst Lauda struggled to 11th, with a lot of potentially difficult cars between him and his teammate. Lauda approached the race as pragmatically as ever, staying out of trouble on the first lap, and even losing positions to ensure he wasn't involved in an accident, and then, methodically, working his way through the field. Lauda passed the 2 Ferraris on the same lap, then Rosberg's Williams and Senna's Lotus to move into 3rd position. With Prost leading, Lauda now had to catch and pass Nigel Mansell in order to reach the 2nd place he needed to deny the Frenchman his first World Championship. As it turned out, Mansell retired with brake problems 17 laps before the checkered flag, leaving the 2 McLaren drivers to cruise to a 1-2 finish, clinching Lauda's 3rd world title by just half a point from his teammate, the smallest winning margin in Formula One history. It had been a triumphant and lucrative return for Lauda, becoming just the 4th man to win 3 world titles after Fangio, Brabham and Stewart. His 1984 triumph had been perhaps his greatest, coming as it did in the face of fierce competition from the young pretender Alain Prost, who would himself go on to secure 4 world titles. Even during the battle for the championship, there was more going on than met the eye. Lauda was in secret negotiations to move to Renault for 1985, meeting with team manager Gerard Larousse and going as far as to agree a contract which would have been signed but for the intervention of Renault president Bernard Hinault, who blocked the contract. With the title battle still wide open, Lauda was keen to keep the meeting with Renault quiet, lest Ron Dennis tilt the championship in favour of Prost. So, imagine his surprise when on arriving home he was called by Ron Dennis, who confronted him with the full detail of all that had been discussed with the French team. Lauda persuaded Dennis that nothing had been signed, and after an intervention by Marlborough, a contract with McLaren was agreed, which both were happy with. In all likelihood, the French government, which owned Renault, would never have sanctioned Lauda's salary at a time when automotive workers' jobs were under threat and the Régie was losing money at an incredible rate. But the episode could potentially have cost Lauda the title if Dennis had decided to play him foul in the final races of the year. In 1985, Lauda was struck with a run of bad luck, with one retirement following another. He was once more thinking of retirement, and whilst events in Montreal, a poor qualifying session, and starting 17th on the grid, meant this was where the decision was probably made in his head, it was actually set in stone at the Nurburgring, the first race at the revised and shortened version of the track where he had so nearly died in 1976. He informed Ron Dennis of his decision to retire, but agreed to keep the news private until Dennis had secured a replacement driver. Lauda was able to announce his news at his home race in Austria, but the press conference was soured by an incredibly crass speech from Dennis, who made no mention of Lauda at all, instead complaining that John Barnard, the architect of McLaren's success, received no credit for his genius. The right sentiment, but not the right time to share it. At the next race, in Holland, Dennis asked Lauda to support Prost's title charge by giving up victory if the situation arose. Despite qualifying 10th and having handling problems with his car, Lauda did indeed claim the lead, with Prost passing Senna for second place and charging onto the back of his teammate's car with just a handful of laps to run. Lauda defended aggressively and held on to take victory, much to Dennis's disgust. Prost was initially put out, but the two drivers reached a rapprochement quickly. This was to be Lauda's last victory in Formula One, and he walked away to once more focus on his airline at the end of the year. It was not the last we were to see of Lauda in Formula One though, as he would take on a role at Ferrari in 1993, as the team sought to end its World Championship drought, which was 14 years long at that point. In 2001, he would return once more to take control of the struggling Jaguar Formula One team, his experience once more being sought by a failing team. And then finally in 2012, he became chairman of the Mercedes Formula One team, bringing Lewis Hamilton into the fold and overseeing 6 World Championships before his death in 2019. His death was ultimately a result of his accident in 1976. He had received both lung and kidney transplants in an attempt to mitigate the damage done in the flames of the Nurburgring, but after contracting flu whilst in hospital undergoing dialysis to relieve kidney problems, he passed away. Formula One had lost a giant of a man. Niki Lauda's life was a remarkable journey of triumph, tragedy, and extraordinary resilience. His comeback from the brink of death to twice become a world champion again is a testament to the power of the human spirit. He was more than just a racing driver. He was an icon, a symbol of courage, determination, and the unwavering pursuit of excellence. His legacy, as one of Formula One's greatest and most inspiring figures, will endure for generations to come.